Greetings, good people, and a warm welcome to Heaven Bless the Little Ones. And I'm your host, Tom O'Connor. And we have a most extraordinary program this evening, a mystical program touching on divinity in the later half of the 20th century. My very special guest this evening is Father Joseph Mullen, and he is a Capuchin.
That's right.
Capuchin monk priest from New York City currently, and he's at St. John the Baptist Church. And we're going to talk about an uncanonized saint right now. His name is Father Solanus Casey. A very famous name in New York City, and we're going to find more about the mystical relationship that Father Solanus had while living in New York City as well as Detroit as a priest. Thank you so much, Father, for being our very special guest today.
Oh, thank you for the privilege of being here and letting people know who Father Solanus is.
But before we let him know who he is, we're going to find a little bit about you.
Sorry.
You're going to be the spokesman for Father Solanus this evening. And he's in heaven, I'm sure, looking down, saying, I'm sure you're going to do a good job. Where were you born, Father?
I was born in Yonkers, New York.
And you're a local New Yorker.
Well, yeah, you might say accidentally I was born there. We were kind of tripping around in those days from Scranton to New York, Yonkers, and Manhattan.
And so that's what your birthplace...
My birthplace happened to be in Yonkers, New York.
Well, that's to our advantage. And then tell us, now you are a Capuchin priest.
That's right.
How many years have you been one now?
Well, I've been a priest 56 years, 49 years. I will celebrate my 50th anniversary in the priesthood next June.
Oh, well, I look forward to being there.
Well, I'll send you a special invitation.
Oh, thank you very much. There's a certain advantage to being a talk show host. You get invited to gala affairs. But we're going to talk about Father Solanus Casey, an extraordinary priest who had a certain difficulty being a priest in the normal sense of the word. And we're going to define and talk about the word simplex priest, because not many people have heard about it, but I want you to give us a little idea of what his role was as a priest and was not able to do as a priest.
Well, Father Solanus Casey was ordained in 1904, and he was ordained as a simplex priest or a mass priest because his theological studies didn't come up to par. Consequently, he was prohibited, or crippled, you might say, from practicing those two
functions, perhaps?
Functions, yes.
Okay,
Two functions as he has as two sacramental functions of hearing confessions and preaching. He could not practice those because he had to have a certain academic excellence, and which he lacked. And so he remained a simplex priest through the course of his life.
So he died in the same disposition as a simplex priest? Was he ever allowed then, finally, to preach sermons or to hear confession?
Well, he died as a simplex priest, and he was never, that prohibition remained constant. What was allowed to him from the beginning was to preach simple homilies, for instance, and say Mass, of course, but a formal sermon he was never allowed to perform. Little fervorinos or sermons for the edification of the people, yet those he could do, right up to the end of his life.
There was a quote, and it's a very interesting quote. Some of the information you gave me was, you said, at his death in 1957, the man who had been the least of his priestly peers has become one of the greatest. Why did he become one of the greatest?
Because in the whole course of his priestly life, he accepted, first of all, this prohibition from his superiors, and as a command of obedience, as the will of God for himself. He did not become bitter by it. Mm-hmm. This humiliation, you might say, such as it is, I could well imagine that for most people it would be certainly a humiliation that you cannot exercise the functions of your priesthood as you should. But he accepted them as the will of God, and whatever he had to do, he was allowed to perform the tasks of a menial lay brother, and that's about it. And that's where he was sacristan, he was head of the altar boy society, and also he was porter for 50 years of his priesthood.
Did he ever mention that it bothered him?
No, he never complained about or felt that he had been. He never felt that he was an underprivileged cleric, as it were.
I see. So that's very important.
Yes.
So he didn't complain. But 5,000 people showed up at this simplex priest funeral. But why? Why so many?
When he was buried in 1957, the funeral director, Mr. Van Leberg, said that 6,000 people passed through from about 10:30 in the morning till 3 p.m. in the afternoon when they closed the doors temporarily, and afterwards they opened them again, and more people than those 6,000 would have certainly come to pay their respects. There wasn't time nor convenience, but they came to a priest who had done so much for them in the sense of counseling. Although he didn't hear confessions, people came to him for counseling. And also, he healed. He was a priest who healed their physical ills.
Are we talking about the word miracles now? A miracle is that priests or maybe saints only have the privilege of administering through supernatural means to cure people of physical and mental ailments?
Well, the only thing that we can go by are the facts of what he did, you know. I'll give you an example of one cure that he made, and people can come to their own conclusions. That this woman, Mrs. Fanning, had a daughter who was born. When she was born, she was absolutely ill, very ill. And there was a bump coming out from her neck. Her limbs were very shriveled for a child. And she hurt. You couldn't touch the child. She would cry if you touched her. And the doctors, they brought it to Mayo Clinic, and the doctors suggested that she should have an operation for her liver, a transplanted liver, but they said the child would never survive it in her condition. So a friend of hers who belonged to St. Bonaventure's friary, Third Order fraternity of the Capuchins, she suggested that they bring the child, the mother bring the child to Father Solanus, who had a reputation for helping people. So she bundled the child up and brought her to St. Bonaventure's friary. And Father Solanus, there was nothing dramatic about his approach to the child. He talked to her very simply. He said, "Hello, Betsy, you're going to be all right." And he gave her a piece of candy. That was it. When she left, the cure was almost instantaneous. She was sitting up in the car. She was alert. She was moving around. And in no time at all, she was back to normalcy. And they took her back to Mayo Clinic, where they had gone previously, and the doctors were incredulous. Is this the same Betsy? Or is this another child that you have? So is that a miracle? I mean, you decide for yourself.
Well, that seems pretty close.
That seems pretty close.
If it wasn't a miracle, then it was a very quiet one. Nothing showy about that.
That's right.
Now, what kind of candy was he using?
I don't know. I don't want to put a plug in for any manufacturers here.
Well, that's great. You know, we're talking about Father Solanus. Let's take a look at what he looked like. And if I may I hand you a few pictures? I'll hand you this one. This is your favorite of his.
Yeah, that's my favorite of Father Solanus because it's bright and it shows the strength of his face and the character and the pleasantness. I'm dissatisfied with most of the photographs that he took.
Well, here's a bigger one, and it makes you up a bit clearer. I'll take that one from you. Thank you.
So this is also a picture of Father Solanus. Now, one of his biographers, in fact, who wrote a book about him, who happened to be watching him while he was not interviewing, but he was speaking to his mother and counseling her. He said, he describes him, a man of serene, peaceful, and gentle countenance as he looked at him across the room. And he had a high forehead and a kind of a humped nose, a broad smile, and a serene and peaceful face. And it just seemed to exude kindness. And that was the impression that this man had of Father Solanus, probably in his more youthful age.
Many of the priests and monks and brothers lived with him on a daily basis.
They did, yes.
In New York?
In New York, they lived with him in Sacred Heart Monastery up in Yonkers. He was there a number of years, about 10. He lived in Harlem.
At a local church?
At a local church in our friary. And he lived down on...
You have one in Harlem?
Yeah, we had a church in Harlem.
Uh-huh.
And then we have a church in Pitt Street on the Lower East Side. And all these, he lived in... Altogether in New York, he lived about 20 years out of his priesthood, his apostolate.
So he died in 1957.
That's right.
Extraordinary funeral, as we talked about. Many people came. Would you say that when he was administering counseling to people, it was, in a sense, what is commonly called now spiritual direction?
Yes, you might say it was a spiritual direction. But he seems to have cheated a little. Because, and the reason I say that, because he got divine direction himself, you know.
Oh.
Like this, I'll give you an example of this. A young woman came to him and she said that she wanted to enter the convent. And he told her, that's not your vocation to enter the convent. And she said, why not? She said, no. He said, no, you're not going to enter the convent. You shouldn't. And she was quite distraught by this. So he said, no. You're going, she insisted on having her way. So he said, this is what's going to happen to you. You're going to marry a man in the military, and you're going to have more children than I can count on one hand. In fact, I'll start the other.
Is that right?
Yes. So she went out, left, and she was a little bit angry, you know. And she tried to find her way to have a vocation in some religious congregation. Didn't work out. She married a man from the military, and she had 7 kids.
Wow. Well, maybe her prayers were answered in a different direction.
Yeah, well, that's why I say Father Solanus cheated, and in fact, God was giving him the answers, you know.
Well, I mean, the trick is, how do you get that divine connection?
That's right.
Ah.
Because I think God loves those that are tremendously humble. This man was humble.
Humility is a virtue that really exists.
That really exists.
In human beings.
Not easy to get, but he had it.
But is it always visible?
I think so.
You think so?
I think humility is very visible, and the truly humble people are loved by others. Truly humble.
Is that right?
I think so. Yeah.
They're the top on the hit parade, huh?
Yeah.
Well, he came from a large family himself, didn't he?
Well, he came from his family. Altogether, Mr. and Mrs. Casey, Bernard, or Barney Sr., as they called him, and Ellen had 15 children altogether.
15 children.
2 of them died, 2 girls. One was 12 and the other was a little, kind of the infant stage, a little above. They died from black diphtheria while they were in Wisconsin, living on the banks of the Mississippi. 13 survived. Father Solanus and a couple of the other boys of the family also got that diphtheria, but they were survivors. But it also affected Father Solanus in his throat. And for many years, he labored with a wispy voice and sometimes a painful throat condition.
Oh.
From that, they figure it was from that.
So tell us, since you know so much about Father Solanus, and I'm really glad you do, did he always know that he was going to be a priest? Did he always know that he was going to be a Capuchin?
No, he didn't know
and did he ever dream that he may be someday a canonized saint?
Well, I tell you, he didn't know he was going to be a Capuchin or a saint even or even a priest because he had proposed to a girl. At 17, he proposed to a girl, Rebecca.
Rebecca of Sunnybrook Farm. And what happened? She turned him down?
No, she didn't turn him down, but she was only 16. And he proposed to her, and she said, well, I have to ask my mother before we marry. And so she did, and her mother, when she got wind of this, she whisked the girl out of the area and brought her back to Boston and gave her a good scolding too.
That's right.
She said, well, how come? You're only 16 years old. You have all the years of your girlhood to live, and you shouldn't be thinking of marriage at this time. And after that, they corresponded a little bit, and then it frittered out.
I have a feeling that mother was cheating a bit too. Maybe she had a divine message saying, what do you think you're going to marry a saint for? This guy's going to be a priest. And maybe she didn't tell. Maybe that mother should be canonized. These are lines that you probably never hear anyplace else. But right. So he then, instead of getting married, decided to become a lumberjack?
Well, the reason he had various jobs that when he was in his teens, he decided to do these jobs to help out the family, who were reeling oftentimes with poor harvests and so forth, and they needed the financial help. So he became a lumberjack in Stillwater. He used to walk over the catwalk and feeding the logs into the mill from the river. And then he was and this was the summertime, away from school. When he had to go back to school, the job was over. But it was a great help to the people. He was a prison guard and handyman at the state prison. And he was a motorman in Appleton, Wisconsin. And all these jobs were to help his family in their own difficulties.
He also played the violin.
He played the violin, yes.
So he was not exactly an untalented individual.
No, and you figure that, well, in his biography it had that the violin appeared somehow in the house. Maybe, I don't know, Mr. his father, Barney Casey, probably picked it up somewhere and brought it home, and he tutored himself to play the violin.
Is that church in Harlem still there, Our Lady Queen of Angels?
Yes. Our Lady Queen of Angels is still in Harlem, yes.
Still in Harlem.
And so is the one in Pitt Street.
Tell me, and many people have met him. You know about him. Did you ever see him, meet him, talk to him? Or just live in the same province?
Well, we lived in the same province. We were contemporaries. I would have loved to have seen him and asked about the spiritual state of my soul and so forth. But I never got a chance to see him. We just didn't. I was in studies, and then I went to the missions, and as soon as I was ordained, so I never got a chance to see him.
So what happened in the monastery, being a priest? Are there telltale evidence of sanctity seen through the eyes of a provincial, a spiritual director, or was it totally oblivious to all for a while?
No, he had great respect among his peers. When he was coming up for ordination, the faculty staff was pretty much against him. The staff wanted to not let him be ordained. And his biggest champion was the director of the seminary. He said he should be ordained. He's going to be another curé of ours. At that time he recognized him, and he was not even ordained yet.
So he was the only one that recognized him?
Well, they must have recognized his holiness, but he was the one that implied how important holiness was for the ordination,
Let me ask you a question that's a little bit offbeat here. Is intellectualism in the priesthood given today a higher point of recognition than sanctity?
Well, it's hard to make the comparison because if you haven't got the intellectual qualities for being a priest, ordinarily, no matter how holy you are, you cannot be ordained to the priesthood. And the intellect or the wisdom is necessary. St. Teresa of Avila, I think it was, said, I would rather have a priest that was wise or intelligent than one that was holy as a spiritual director.
Was there anything wrong with that saint saying that?
No, nobody's ever criticized that or said it was a heresy of any kind.
I don't like it. I think I'll be the first one. I prefer sanctity rather than intellectualism. I've met a few intellectuals who need a lot of sanctity, believe me. So, what do you think he's done for your order?
Well, he has pushed it, the Capuchins. By his life, he spread the Capuchin mission, you know. Capuchins became more famous because of it, and his holiness and his fame was rubbed off on many of the Capuchins. Now, for instance, in Propagation of the Faith, which is the mass association, at the time of Father Solanus, this was not pushed very much, you know. Since that time, the Capuchin Mission Association has taken off, you know, and people come for masses, which the donations for the masses are used for the Capuchin missions. And I think that throughout the United States, the name of Father Solanus is being mentioned, and the very fact that he was a Capuchin pushes the name of the order and the fame of the order.
So let's talk about you and your religious community. You're located where in Manhattan?
In St. John's on 31st Street, right opposite the Madison Square Garden.
Now, if anybody was ever interested in talking to you about Father Solanus or the Father Solanus Guild, can they call you at a particular number or the Franciscan Order just to familiarize themselves more with this great contemporary future saint of ours?
Yes, they can. In fact, for any time that people want to come in and talk to a priest, there's a priest on duty every day, all afternoon. And if
what number would that be?
It's 564 9070.
That's 212.
212.
And let's have it for the people who are just looking for a paper and a pencil and want to jot it down.
Well, the number by which they can reach the Capuchins and learn about Father Solanus is the following. Area code 212 564 9070.
Virtue in life. Virtue. What is, besides humility, a virtue that if you were a spiritual director, you would look for in some of your monks and priests?
Well, maybe I can say, you know, that first of all, everybody should be in God's grace and friendship. That's a necessary condition.
Are you talking about a state of grace?
Yeah, the state
free of mortal sin?
That's right. Everybody should have that. And if they haven't got that, they should get it. But
namely by confession.
By confession, yes. And they should strive to be, they should always be morally certain that they're in the state of grace. That's a very necessary condition. And the one thing that we do in this life is the spiritual life isn't difficult. It's simple, actually. There's a mnemonic that they use in AA. It says KISS. You know what KISS is?
Yeah, I'm sure you're going to tell us, Father. I'm sure it's not romantic.
No, it isn't. It means keep it simple, stupid.
Oh,
that's the
really?
spiritual life.
KISS.
Keep it simple, stupid.
Oh, wow, that's an extraordinary expression.
Yes, and besides that, you know, that when the young man came to our Lord and asked him, what must I do to be saved? I mean, he didn't give him a big, long venue to follow.
A long spiel, right?
No, he says,
keep it simple. Without the word stupid, right?
Keep the commandments.
Keep the commandments.
But to keep the commandments, I would say, giving spiritual direction, if you want to keep the commandments, you don't just come. I don't make you spiritual. God makes you spiritual.
All you have to do is say,
keep in communication with God.
What's the best way?
Well, you know, loving God isn't any different than loving anybody else. I mean, love. We have the same faculty, so how do you love? How do you love somebody? You love by communicating. Communication is the key. You love by communicating with God. That's prayer, communicating.
Well, this is a form of communication right now, right?
Right.
So is this a form of prayer right now?
Sure.
Wow. So everybody who's watching the show can see is that we're communicating.
Yes, we
are.
are.
Are we succeeding?
Well, we hope we're succeeding. We're succeeding with each other, I believe.
I can canonize you right now. You're one of my best guests I ever had. Well, you deserve a lot of recognition. You've been a priest for how many years?
49.
And you will be the key to sponsor, I'm sure, the canonization of Father Solanus.
Well, we want to sponsor him. We want to have more people know of his goodness and his virtue. You know, between 1923 and 1924, Father Benno Eichinger, who was a provincial at the time, told him to keep a memorandum of all the names that that had received favors through him and through the Seraphic Mass Association. In that one year, 1923 and 1924, there were 94 jottings, cases, put down by Father Solanus.
Is that right? Out of obedience.
Yeah, he put them down out of obedience. The provincial told him to do that, so he did it. 1 year. He served, after that, he served 30 years in St. Bonaventure's. Imagine how many wonderful things he did.
There was a great saint, Saint Teresa of Lisieux, who said, in a quote, "I will spend my heaven doing good upon earth."
Right.
Now, do you think that we can take that quote out of context for Saint Teresa of Lisieux, one of the greatest saints of the 20th century, and just tack it on to Father Solanus? Do you think he's still very busy in heaven, checking out disciples and sinners and cures and whatever?
I think so. I had one personal case that I was interested in. That I met this woman in Florida. She had had a stroke and one side was paralyzed, and so I gave her a little leaflet of Father Solanus with a relic on it of his habit, and I told her to pray to Father Solanus. Now, I didn't bring that. I should have brought that letter with me. But anyway, she wrote to me a couple of months afterwards that she had been praying to him, and one night she felt like she was sitting in her chair, and she felt it like a light was in the room, and she felt immensely at peace. And when she woke up, she said, "Gee, that was a nice dream." But her arm was, that she had not been able to move before, was perfectly well. She wrote that to me. I told her to write the case up and send it to Father Solanus.
Oh, wow.
Because in all of these things, it has to be documented. Doctors have seen it before and after and so forth.
One quick question, because the program, we're not running out of questions or answers, but of course, time flies on earth as well as there's no time in heaven, of course. But he's abolished that for the saints as made it, and angels too. What about his canonization before we close? Is there any obstacles, or is the church acting too slowly on this miraculous man?
Well, the church, as far as I'm concerned, the church always acts very slowly in this regard. Sometimes people have waited an awful long time. But the fact is that he has been declared venerable already, which is a big step towards his canonization, and that gives you great hope for his eventual canonization. I don't see that. I can't see any obstacle why the man should not be canonized. But that is the decision of the church, when and where they will do this, you know.
So this is, of course, the conclusion of our show, because Father Solanus has had the greatest 29 minutes on television. So I'm sure that he's very pleased at what you said, and we have no intention of being, of course, the devil's advocate, of which every future canonized saint has to have.
Well, the reason for canonization, more or less, is not so much to give glory to the individual themselves, but to be an example for people.
And so this program is coming to a conclusion, and I thank you so much, Father Mullen, for being our very special guest and an excellent spokesman for Father Solanus.
Thank you.
And this is Tom O'Connor for Heaven Bless the Little Ones. And we have, during this program, as you have seen, a future canonized saint who was a Capuchin and who one day will be canonized in Rome as probably one of the most humble future saints in the later half of the 20th century. Thank you again, Father. And this is Tom O'Connor. Thank you for allowing us into your homes once again.